Chapter 18, the last chapter of Jimbo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Chapter 18. Home. But it was the sound of something crashing heavily through the top branches of the elms that made the boy realize he was actually being followed, and all his efforts became concentrated into the desire to put as much distance as possible between himself and the horror of the empty house. He heard the noise of big wings far beneath him, and his one idea was to outdistance his pursuer and then come down again to earth and rest his wings in the branches of some tree till he could devise some plan how to find the governess. So at first he raced at full speed through the air, taking no thought of direction. When he looked down, all he could see was that something vague and shadowy, shaking out a pair of enormous wings between him and the earth, moved along with him. Its path was parallel with his own, but apparently it made no effort to rise up to his higher level. It thundered along far beneath him, and instinctively he raised his head and steered more and more upwards and away from the world. The gap at the end of his right wing, where the feathers had been torn out, seemed to make no difference in his power of flight or steering, and he went tearing through the night at a pace he had never dared to try before, and at a height he had never yet reached in any of the practice flights. He had soared higher even than he knew, and perhaps this was fortunate, for the friction of the lower atmosphere might have heated him to the point of igniting, and some watcher at one of Earth's windows might have suddenly seen a brilliant little meteor flash through the night and vanish into dust. At first the joy of escape was the only idea his mind seemed able to grasp, and he revelled in a passionate sense of freedom, and all his energies poured themselves into one concentrated effort to fly faster, faster, faster. But after a time, when the pursuer had been apparently outflown, and he realized that escape was an accomplished fact, he began to search for the governess, calling to her, rising and falling, darting in all directions, and then hovering on outstretched wings to try and catch some sound of a friendly voice. But no answer came, even from the stars that crowded in the vault above, or from the dark surface of the world below. Only silence answered his cries, and his voice was swallowed up and lost in the immensity of space almost the moment it left his lips. Presently he began to realize to what an appalling distance he had risen above the world, and with anxious eyes he tried to pierce the gaping emptiness beneath him and on all sides. But this vast sea of air had nothing to reveal. The stars shone like pinholes of gold pricked in a deep black curtain, and the moon, now rising slowly, spread a veil of silver between him and the upper regions. There was not a cloud anywhere, and the winds were all asleep. He was alone in space, yet as the swishing of his wings slackened and the roar of the air in his ears died away, he heard in the short pause the ominous beating of great wings somewhere in the depths beneath him, and he knew that the great pursuer was still on his track. The glare of the moon now made it impossible to distinguish anything properly, and in those huge spaces, with nothing to guide the eye, it was difficult to know exactly from what direction sound came. He was only sure of one thing, that it was far below him, and that for the present it did not seem to come much nearer. A cry for help that kept rising to his lips he suppressed, for it would only have served to guide his pursuer, and moreover a cry, a little thin despairing cry, was instantly lost in these great heavens. It was less than a drop in an ocean. On and on he flew, always pointing away from the earth, and trying hard to think where he would find safety. Would this awful creature hunt him all night long into the daylight, or would he be forced back into the empty house in sheer exhaustion? The thought gave him new impetus, and with powerful strokes he dashed onwards and upwards through the wilderness of space, in which the only pathways were the little golden tracks of the starbeams. The governess would turn up somewhere. He was positive of that. She had never failed him yet. So, alone and breathless, he pursued his flight, and the higher he went, the more the tremendous vault opened up into the inconceivable and untold distances. His speed kept increasing. He thought he had never found flying so easy before, and the thunder of the following wings that held persistently on his track made it dangerous for him to slacken up for more than a minute here and there. The earth became a dark blot beneath him, while the moon, rising higher and higher, grew weirdly bright and close. How black the sky was, how piercing the points of starlight, how stimulating the strong new odours of these lofty regions. He realized with a thrill of genuine awe that he had flown over the very edge of the world, and the moment the thought entered his mind it was flung back at him by a voice that seemed close to his ear one moment, and the next was miles away in the space overhead. Light thoughts, born of the stars and the moon and of his great speed, danced before his mind in fanciful array. Once he laughed aloud at them, but once only. The sound of his voice fell unpleasantly dead in these echoless spaces, and made him afraid. The speed, too, affected his vision, for at one moment the thin cloud stretched across his face, and the next he was whirling through perfectly clear air again, with no vestige of a cloud in sight. The same reason doubtless explained the sudden presence of sheets of light in the air that reflected the moonlight like particles of glittering ice, and then suddenly disappeared again. The terrific speed would explain a good many things, but certainly it was curious how creatures formed out of the hollow darkness like foam before a steamer's bows, and moved noiselessly away on either side to join the army of dim life that crowded everywhere and watched his passage. For in front and on both sides there gathered a vast assembly of silent forms, more than shadows, less than bodily shapes, that opened up a pathway as he rushed through them, and then immediately closed up their ranks again when he had passed. The air seemed packed with living creatures. Space was filled with them. They surrounded him on all sides, yet his passage through them was like the passage of a hand through smoke. It was easy to make a pathway, but the pathway left no trace behind it. The smoke rushed in and filled the void. He could never see these things properly, face to face. They always kept just out of the line of vision, like shadows that follow a lonely walker in a wood and vanish the moment he turns to look at them over his shoulder. But ever by his side, with a steady, effortless motion, he knew they kept up with him, strange inhabitants of the airless heights, immense and misty-winged, with veiled, flaming eyes and silent feathers. He was not afraid of them, for they were neither friendly nor hostile. They were simply the beings of another world, alien and unknown. But what puzzled him more was that the light and the darkness seemed separate things, each distinctly visible. After each stroke of his wings he saw the darkness shift downwards past him through the air like a veil. It floated all round him in thinnest diaphanous texture, visible not because the moonlight made it so, but because in its inmost soul it was itself luminous. It rose and fell in eddies, swirling wreaths and undulations. Inwoven with starbeams, as with golden thread, it clothed him about in circles of some magical primordial substance. Even the stars, looking down upon him from terrifying